Welcome back to the Fit Project podcast. I'm your host, Coach Micah, and in today's episode, we're discussing how to retain as much muscle mass as possible during a fat loss phase and even potentially gain muscle mass during a fat loss phase. I want to talk about some of the training and diet specifics that you should know to make sure that you have the best outcome in terms of muscle mass when you are losing body fat. Now, before I cue the intro like normal, I want to let you guys in on something that I decided to do with this podcast. You can now find this podcast on YouTube. Just look up the Fit Project podcast. I am going to be recording one workout per week from my current routine or any type of workouts that I do. And I'm basically going to be putting it behind this audio, or putting this audio, let's say, over top of those workout clips. And I'm going to be providing the sets and the reps that I do to this entire workout. So that way, not only do you guys have the information that I'm spilling out in these audio clips for these podcasts, and we're not just on Spotify and Google Podcasts and all the other platforms, we're also on YouTube with a visual, providing you with a workout that you can actually save and take to the gym with you. Therefore, if you are listening to this podcast at the gym, you also have a workout that you can do if you need help in that department as well. So the workouts will vary from week to week. You know, maybe some episodes will be leg day, some days will be upper body focused on various parts, maybe even a core focused workout, maybe even some mobility. But every single Friday, of course, is when I release these podcast episodes, and that's what I want to do. A few years ago, I had sort of been recording myself do these podcasts and posting them on YouTube, and then eventually the views were so low after about a year of doing so that it didn't seem like me taking the time to film and edit and then upload that, plus do the audio to the different podcast platforms was worth it, because the amount of views that I got on these audio episodes were enough for me to satisfy, my, what I wanted to get out of these podcasts. And I was happy with the amount of people listening. So, I think this is a little bit easier for me because I already record a lot of what I do at the gym, and I'm recording workouts week after week anyway. So I'm just kind of doing it in a format that allows the podcast to be on YouTube. So yeah, if you want to check this out on YouTube and check out the workout for this week, we are doing an upper body workout that is focused on chest with a little bit of back and shoulders and traps as well. So tune on YouTube to get a upper body workout that you can do at the gym. So let's cue the intro and get into today's episode. All right, guys, if you are a returning listener, I appreciate you as always. If you are new here, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. And hopefully you guys, like I mentioned in the intro, get a little something from the YouTube side of things as well. And I don't think it's going to be, that much added work for me overall. So without further ado, let's get right into the topic of today's podcast, because it is something that I feel like gets overlooked by a lot of individuals who are strictly thinking about fat loss or are just kind of uneducated in the world of nutrition and exercise, or have never done any type of diet or followed an exercise routine, which is, a lot of the people that I work with. And this is an aspect that doesn't really come to your mind when you're thinking about losing body fat and getting in shape, right? When a lot of people think about, I want to get fit, they automatically just think, all right, I've got this body fat that I need to lose. And obviously I need to kind of pull back my food intake and I need to exercise more, which is true. But this is where we kind of run into this issue of becoming, you're going to get smaller but you might not necessarily have the outcome that you want to look like or that you envisioned, right? You have that sort of, what we can kind of say is a skinny fat physique, right? You're slim, but you still got some pouches on the lower end of your stomach. Maybe you've got some jiggly triceps on the back of your arm, and those can be a result of not approaching your fat loss journey properly with the type of exercise that you do and the approach that you take to your diet to a certain degree, and the habits that come along with recovery in terms of your exercise. So I do want to go over the importance of lifting weights and what kind of cardio you should do, and then we'll kind of talk about some diet protocols in terms of making sure that we're maximizing our muscle mass. But before we get into all of that, I want to let you know that it is important that you focus on strength and even potentially focusing on gaining a bit of muscle while you're going through your fat loss journey. Gaining muscle, or at least trying to aim to gain muscle during your fat loss journey, is most likely not going to result in a ton of growth, but it is going to allow you to retain some of that muscle mass that you could potentially lose while you are dieting, right? So if you're not familiar already, the way that fat loss works is we have to deprive the body of energy through the form of food, or we have to increase the amount of energy that we're putting out through more exercise. And that can cause that can cause the body to take some desperate measures to get the nutrients and the fuel that it needs, that it actually does need, right? This is why a caloric deficit, is the only way to lose weight on the scale and to burn body fat. No matter what people say. We had some episodes last week and even a few weeks prior to that, really kind of diving into, again, just really stressing that importance of being what I call a negative energy balance, which kind of, when you say it that way, makes more sense. But when you are pulling back calories, you're obviously pulling back total food that you're consuming, which means the potential for less nutrients that are vital to the body, and it's harder to get enough protein and enough things that you need to support good energy to support the muscle mass that we want to retain. So there's a potential during your fat loss journey that your body could use muscle tissue as a form of fuel. It could also reduce muscle tissue, and the importance of it could reduce muscle tissue because that allows the body to, again, reduce its energy demands to adapt to the amount of food that you are consuming, right? So a lot of people kind of overlook this, right? They just think I need to, eat less and move more, but that can cause some issues down the road. So the first thing that I really want to discuss with you is lifting weights. And of course, I think a lot of people understand that lifting weights is important, but I think it's even more important when it comes to losing body fat specifically, right? And I'm really going to stress that you need to be lifting heavy, right? Remember that our body adapts to everything that we do. Lifting heavy, is what's going to retain strength, right? If you don't push the weight that you can push, your strength will go down. It's like if you don't, if you can run for 10 kilometers straight, if you don't continuously practice that every so often, you will eventually lose that ability. So when we are dieting for fat loss and we're pulling back calories, it is much easier to lose strength. So it's much more important for you to push for strength and retaining that strength and even potentially gaining strength. A lot of beginners can put on strength during a fat loss phase, even though there's not a lot of fuel, and they're still, they're assuming they're aiming fat loss, they could still see some strength growth. But retaining strength forces your body to retain muscle tissue as well, because if it recognizes that heavy lifting is a part of your regular daily routine, it will prioritize muscle tissue to make sure it has the strength needed to go through those sessions, those exercise sessions that you're doing, right? So therefore, heavy weights must be consistent in order for your body to retain muscle tissue. So when we're talking about lifting heavy, I'm not just referring to like low rep ranges, right? I'm not just saying like you have to do 1 rep maxes or 3 reps, 4 reps. I'm talking about any rep range that you do, whether it's 10 reps, you want to make sure that you're lifting heavy as you can for those 10 reps. And even if the goal is 15, make sure you're lifting as heavy as you can for 15 reps. Because the like heavy weight is relevant to the rep goal that you have set, right? It's essentially creating the challenge. Each and every set that you do should be challenging. Now, this also doesn't mean that you need to train to failure every set. Like, you don't need to go balls to the wall, super intense every single set, but you do, however, need to train fairly close to failure on most of your sets, meaning each and every set should feel somewhat of a challenge. Because obviously pushing things too far and just training, super crazy, like extreme failure and beyond with a ton of drop sets, supersets, and just going nuts, that makes things difficult to recover from. Like we mentioned earlier, your body's already being deprived of calories and potential nutrients. You're not able to train at that level all the time while you're in a caloric deficit, right? So keep that in mind. But I will say this. In terms of weightlifting and retaining muscle mass, I'm going to give you a minimum amount of sessions per week, which is kind of broad because, we could talk about how much are we doing in each session, which is probably going to matter more. But a minimum of 4 training sessions per week. And you can probably split that up however you want. Ideally, you want to try to hit each muscle group twice per week. So that means you've got to have like 2 upper body days, 2 lower body days, or you could do 4 full body days targeting various things. But make sure you're tapping those muscle fibers couple times, like every few days, essentially. And I would say a maximum would be 6 days, right? Again, the reduction of calories, reduction of nutrients to refuel, replenish fuel, and the nutrients to recover becomes difficult the more work that you do. So again, maximum I would say is 6. Of course, it's all relevant to how hard you train. If you train fairly easy, then you could probably train more days per week. If you're someone who likes to train really, really hard and heavy and you take more sets to failure, you're probably going to want to have some more rest days in there. But, I would say something like 3 days a week just isn't frequent enough. And it's just not enough time to get everything in that you need to get in, especially to signal the need for muscle your muscle to be retained when you're deprived of nutrition, right? And 6 is, like I say, 6 to 7 is just too much to recover from. So that's sort of the protocols on lifting heavy, lifting weights in general, and why I think it's important, to lift heavy. And this I found in my own experience, and I'll tell you, there's 2 things that I'm going to mention in this podcast that I think are the most important when it comes to retaining muscle, and this is one of them, is lifting weights, but lifting heavy specifically. That is going to be, I'll probably say it's the number 1 game changer, right? Because it's a clear signal to your body that we need this muscle tissue. Like we cannot risk, burning off this muscle tissue for fuel or getting rid of it to lower our metabolism and all that good stuff, right? We need to make sure we're keeping that muscle tissue, and lifting heavy is a good signal. Now, moving on to cardio. This is really important as well. I think it's important to note how much cardio you're doing and how intense you are training. Again, this is going to cause your body to recognize whether it needs to get rid of some muscle tissue, or at least lose some of the fullness and how much like glycogen is being stored. So how much carbohydrates are being stored within the muscle cells, that it has kind of to spare, given all the things in your body that depend on that type of energy. Now I'll kind of tell you the story of my experience with running last year and sort of what I noticed with the amount of cardio that I was doing. I ran 2 half marathons last year, and I trained for months to get the best time that I possibly could. So I was running 4 I'm going to go ahead and say between 3 and 5 times per week. So 4 would be the average. And I was running like 10Ks, 16 kilometers, those types of runs multiple times per week, as well as, the nice short, quick runs. I was doing just a lot more running specifically, a little bit more higher intense. And I was saying, my intensity was probably, a good 7 out of 10, 6 out of 10, which is, in that, a little bit above moderate level. Now, in the very beginning, I didn't notice much, right? I didn't notice any reduction in muscle mass. I was still training 5 days a week. I was still eating enough. I wasn't really eating in a deficit at this point. I was eating enough to support my training. I was losing weight though, so I probably was in a little bit of a deficit, but I wasn't specifically like aiming at a deficit with my calories. Like I was eating intuitively with whatever I wanted. But the first few months of running like that, and even well into my first half marathon, I didn't notice any difference in terms of muscle size and even strength and anything. But over time, after like 6 months of doing this and training like this, I eventually did reduce my lifting to 4 days a week because I was struggling with recovery. So I was like, all right, if running's a priority, I'll sacrifice a lift. I have another half marathon to train for. But over time, I noticed that my leg strength, because that was the one session that I only did once per week, my leg strength went down, leg size went down, and just overall general muscle fullness. Like I mentioned earlier, my muscles just weren't as full, even at a resting rate. My pumps in the gym weren't as big. I didn't lose any upper body strength, but I definitely didn't feel as full, and my pumps weren't there. And I think that's just because, number one, obviously I was doing a ton of running that I'm not used to, but I don't think I was necessarily eating enough carbohydrates and drinking enough water that I needed to in that time frame. I was doing enough to get me by, I think, but my body was compensating by getting rid of muscle mass, so that way we don't have to, we're not as deprived, right? If you reduce the amount of muscle that you have, there's less need for energy, right? And of course, that made me it makes me lighter on my feet. So my body was sort of prioritizing running, right? And that's why I lost some leg size and leg strength, because all I needed was endurance for what I was doing, right? Now, I'll tell you, it came back quick, because after my second half marathon, I continued to run for a few weeks, but then I really dialed things back to 3 runs a week. And then I went up to 5 lifts per week. And eventually I went down to the point where close to Christmas, I wasn't doing any running. I'm back to running now, but I gained all that size that I had lost, came back in a matter of, I would say a month or two, probably less than 2 months. It all came back. And now actually I feel like my legs have actually gained more size than I've seen in a long time. And my strength it's through the roof in my upper body, right? So I think taking that break from lifting weights was huge in terms of progress for me, and kind of reducing that, which I've never experienced. Like I was probably the smallest that I've had felt in a while. Now I say small, and I say that I lost size and strength during that time with my cardio, but it's me exaggerating, because I notice it so easily, and I try to hold on to as much size as I can. But yeah, anyway, it came back quick, and it wasn't really that significant. I still looked great. When I look back at the, some of my gym pics and gym videos that I made during that time, I still looked fairly close, but to me personally, I noticed a difference. And like I say, the main thing is to know that it takes a long time for your body to really waste away at muscle mass when you're training at high intensities with cardio. So don't think that if your fat loss phase is only going to be, you're aiming at 10 weeks, or you're aiming at, whatever it might be. It's unless it's like 6 months or longer and you're doing a really crazy cardio, which I don't think a lot of people are going to be, you shouldn't be too worried about losing muscle mass. But for the sake of being safe, what I'm going to tell you in this podcast is try to keep your cardio light to moderate. So that would be like a zone 1 or zone 2 cardio, which would be 50, combining those two zones, like a 50 to 65, 70% of your heart rate max. That's what we can kind of use as like a way to know where your heart rate should be during these cardio sessions. So when you're increasing cardio over time in your fat loss journey, as you should be, it's never about the intensity or increasing intensity over time. You probably don't want to do that until you absolutely have to. You want to maximize duration, so how long your cardio sessions are in that low to moderate intensity cardio, and even how frequently you're doing them. So if you're doing 3 days a week, you might want to go to 4. After a few weeks, you might want to go to 5. And then if they're only 30 minutes long, eventually you might want to go to 45 minutes, right? Like, because they're so low intensity, and even at the moderate intensity, you can do them for much longer periods of time without too much stress or too much recovery. Again, going back to the diet, when you're losing body fat, you're going to be in a deficit. It's hard to fuel for these cardio sessions, especially the intense ones. So the low to light moderate, or the light to moderate intense cardio sessions are much easier to recover from, even at longer durations. So that's what you're going to want to focus on in terms of cardio. So keep your cardio a nice low intensity, something you can keep up with for upwards to an hour. And even still, when you get to an hour, you still should feel like you might be able to get more. But that being said, if you're doing, so-called an hour of cardio every day, like some people claim to be doing, your low intensity is probably a little too low, right? Like, bump up the intensity to a certain degree. You should be, feeling a light sweat come on, should be slightly out of breath, but not to the point where you can't have a conversation. Or like, for me, I'll even read my book while I'm walking on the treadmill on like an incline, but like I'm sweating by the end of 30 minutes, but I'm still able to focus on my book and read, right? I wouldn't be able to do that during a run. So keep that in mind. Now, moving on to more of the diet side of things, the main thing you're going to want to make sure is that your protein is where it needs to be, right? Because of course, in order to lose body fat, you have to reduce calories, but that also reduces the potential for how much protein you're going to get in. So you really have to allocate your calories accordingly. And this is why tracking your macros is so important. People want to avoid this. They want to avoid tracking anything because it's just not natural, or it's just not, they think it's like an eating disorder or whatever, but that's just not the case. Like, you're just avoiding doing the hard work. And if you want to view it as a disorder, go for it. Stay where you want, stay where you are, and just don't see results. But like, again, this is the second thing that I wanted to mention in this podcast. That is the second most important thing. It may be even just as important as lifting heavy, but keeping your protein high. And I'm just going to say, like, your protein should always be high, right? Like, if you're exercising as you should be on a regular basis, 4 to 6 times a week, you should always be eating what they consider to be high protein. My eyes, it's, normal amount of protein. I've always eaten a lot of protein since I was a teen because I've always exercised. I've always lifted weights, and it's always been my priority. So I've never had to be too concerned personally about my protein intake, because what people consider to be a high amount of protein is what I consider to be normal. So I'm telling you, eat a lot of protein. That's the main thing. Like, eat a gram of protein per pound of body weight. That's a very vague and very broad statement, in my opinion, but that's the one that people will use a lot, and it does work if you are not severely overweight, right? If you are 300 pounds plus, 300 grams of protein is not going to be necessary, but for most people that sort of might work. The 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight, right? That might be ideal. I do have podcast episodes on that, specifically going more in depth on what I feel people should be eating for protein. But yeah, protein is the most important. Now, recovery. We've talked about this multiple times in this episode so far. And again, the training, the deficit of calories, the lack of nutrition that comes along, and all the cardio, all this stuff accumulates and makes things harder in a fat loss phase than any other time. Whether we'll say any other time, as in like when you're just like living normally or trying to gain weight. But recovery is much more difficult when you're trying to lose body fat. There's just less, like I said, there's less nutrients. You're depriving the body, right? And that's what you have to do. Again, I want to stress that you have to deprive the body. Some people are like, "Oh no, that's not good. You shouldn't be under eating. You shouldn't be promoting that." I'm sorry, but that's how the body works, right? I'd rather promote that to help you lose body fat than to tell you just to wing it and hope for the best and not see any results ever, or tell people to kind of, it's really just the opposite of telling people to stop eating too much, right? It seems like that's against the law to do now. When you see somebody just like eating too much all the time, it's harder to tell someone that, nowadays than ever before, which is crazy. But anyway, what we're talking about is the recovery protocols. You need to dial them in. And I want to talk about 3 different things here. I want to talk about sleep, which is probably the most important one. We're going to talk about hydration and supplementation. So because you're in a caloric deficit, like we said, your body's being deprived of nutrients. Recovery is harder, as I've already mentioned many times. And I'm really trying to drill that into your head. So you need to take care of the routine surrounding your bedtime, and you really need to, I'm going to use this word, optimize your sleep as much as possible. Sleep is the number one, the number one thing that you can improve to make your recovery the best that it's going to be, right? I think I think sleep is much more important than anything else that you should focus on. Way more than supplementation, right? Sleep. That's why I'm talking about it first. Dial in your sleep. Make sure you're sleeping enough and you're sleeping good while you are dieting, especially long-term dieting, to really make sure your muscles are recovering properly. Now, hydration. Your energy levels can be wonky when you're in a caloric deficit. There are many other protocols that we can use to make sure that our energy is good. You can time out your carbohydrates and your caffeine at the right times to make sure that you're not crashing and to make sure that your energy is peaking at a certain time of day. Of course, sleep is also going to be a part of that as well, as we just mentioned. And an overlooked component is staying properly hydrated. This is what allows your muscles to properly contract and outlast in a given workout. So hydration has a lot to do with the way that you can think, the way that you focus, and the way that you perform in your workouts as well. And even well beyond a fat loss journey, I think people just forget about that. Water is a huge part of how, when I was running these long distances, it's a huge part of how far I could run, how fast I could run, how much I could push in my lifts, how explosive I am with my energy, how much I focus as well. Hydration is huge, and we just kind of overlook it. You pair good hydration with a good night's sleep, you are going to be unbeatable. And you're like, okay, that's what my doctor tells me, or like, that's what everyone says. Yeah, there's a reason for that. And I think that that's why nobody takes it seriously, because it's just like things that we seemingly already do or seemingly already have to do. Like, of course I have to drink water. I drink water, or I have to sleep. Like, no, I'm talking like being obsessive about it the same way that you do with your training, with your lifting weights, everything else that you're so attentive towards. Be attentive to hydration and sleep, and you'll notice a huge difference. So those are important, right? Staying hydrated provides the endurance and stamina you need to push yourself in your workouts to, again, get more out of your workouts and be able to burn more calories to help you with your fat loss. Now, supplementation. Now, in this context, I'm really talking about vitamins and minerals, taking the proper doses of vitamins and electrolytes that are going to be key, because referring back to the diet again, when you're in a caloric deficit, you are lacking potential nutrients needed to regulate muscle contractions and promote recovery. It would also be wise to take some immune system supplements, probably. And because, again, deficit, less food, less nutrients, less vital minerals and vitamins that you need to function at your best. So it might be ideal to help yourself prevent getting sick in your diet to take some more vitamin D, extra vitamin C, some zinc, magnesium. You could even take some turmeric, ginger, all the fancy elixirs maybe. Just some of those ones are ideal. But something that is quite common in long-term dieting is the reduced immune system strength. So, obviously if illness occurs, your ability to train hard and your ability to diet properly and get all your food in just doesn't happen. So that is why I really do think it's important to take some of these vital supplementations. Forget about creatine, and creatine would help, of course. I think it's great to help you train hard in the gym and help your muscles to stay hydrated, which we talked about, which is good. Creatine's good. Maybe not a good example, but of course, don't worry about like pre-workouts and BCAAs and protein powders. Get your protein and all your nutrients from your food if you can first, and then look at that stuff. But I do think if you take like a multivitamin and maybe an electrolyte powder, you'll probably be much better off if you want to spend your money on those things to help you perform better in the gym and even recover better. Make sure your body's getting everything. Now, the last thing I want to mention that I do think helps to a certain degree is what we call refeed days. Some people call them cheat days or cheat meals even, but you want to use these sparingly, especially for fat loss beginners. If you're new to the whole game of dieting and exercise, these oftentimes cannot be that great. They're better for the more advanced and experienced dieter or exercisee. But essentially what they are is they're increasing carb intake for a day to replenish your energy stores, glycogen stores, carbohydrate stores in the muscle for a fresh new week ahead to give you energy. So it helps reboost your energy and keep muscle fullness. Again, helps with hydration, and it helps you sort of revamp everything every so often. And again, it doesn't even have to be, I don't even recommend doing this every week, because I think using the calendar as a way to dictate when you need to be refed is kind of weird. Your body just does what it does on a 24-hour cycle. So just, literally maybe it's every 10 days or every 15 days. But whenever you start to really feel depleted or you start to feel really small and your energy sucks in your workouts, give yourself a refeed day. It doesn't have to be a ton of extra carbs. Maybe you want to do like 200 or 300 calories worth. Maybe just bring your calories back up to maintenance level so you're not gaining anything back, and make sure it's in the form of carbohydrates, and you're going to feel so much better the next day. And then drink a lot of water with that. The scale may go up for a day, but you're going to feel so much better, and it's going to allow you to perform better and burn more calories for the following days to come. And again, replenishing the muscle cells so that way you're full and your muscles are fueled is important to help retain muscle tissue as well. So I think it's good to do that every so often, because the longer you go depriving the muscle tissue, the more likely you could potentially lose that muscle tissue over time, right? But again, not everyone really experiences muscle loss during their fat loss phase as much as other people. Some people, experience it to an extreme degree. Again, there's a lot of genetic components involved, but those are the things that I feel like are going to help you. So just to kind of recap before we end this podcast episode is to make sure you're lifting weights, but make sure you're lifting heavy. Your cardio stays light, at most moderate, and over time increase the duration and the frequency, but not the intensity unless you absolutely need to, right? And just make sure your cardio is not too low, right? Like if you're going to walk, make sure it's a fast-paced walk, right? Number 3 is to make sure your protein intake is high, a gram of protein per pound of body weight, unless you are significantly overweight or obese, is a good protocol to use. Make sure you're dialing in your recovery protocols. Sleep is probably the most important one to focus on. Your pre-bed routine, your morning routine, dial those in, maximize your sleep quality. Again, hydration, make sure you're well hydrated, drink enough water throughout the day, make sure that you're drinking or make sure you're also consuming electrolytes and some vitamins through supplementation if needed to make sure your body's getting everything it needs through the fat loss journey when you are depriving it of fuel. And the last thing, again, what we just talked about is refeed days. Every 10, 15 days, having a day where you increase carbohydrate intake back up to your maintenance level of calories, allowing your body to replenish its energy and keep the muscles full again and go back into training and continue on your journey that way. Those are the protocols that I like to use to make sure that we are retaining as much muscle mass. Like, you will, especially long-term dieting, like, you will lose muscle mass to a certain degree, but the goal is to really prevent that from happening, And I have I have clients who have gained muscle mass, like usually beginners people who have never picked up a dumbbell or never lifted weights at all. Like, when you have never done that before or never lifted weights consistently at all, your body's going to hyper respond like crazy. Right? Your body's just going to, no matter what you have for fuel, it will add new muscle tissue as an adaptive response. It's usually not ideal to be in a deficit still. It might not be the best way to maximize muscle growth, but it can still happen if you are a beginner. And that's usually the only time, that you can make muscle growth happen through your fat loss journey. But anyways, guys, that's it. That's a wrap. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you guys next Friday with another workout as well on YouTube. Hopefully I have enough clips filmed for this one. This is actually a little bit longer of a podcast than I expected. I don't ever expect my episodes to be more than 40 minutes, but I think maybe next time. I haven't yet put the clips over top, but I think maybe next time I'll make sure I have at least 40 minutes of footage for you guys. But anyway, don't forget to stay blessed, and I'll see you next week. Peace.